In the heart of Nzinga village, Amara, the head nurse, walked through the worn hallways clutching a medical chart tightly, as if the paper was the only thing keeping her sanity intact. His hands were shaking, but his determination was palpable. She knew that what was about to happen was not just unusual. It was something that would never be forgotten. The small hospital, with its age-yellowed walls and ancient equipment, seemed an unlikely setting for an event that defied all medical logic. Behind the scenes, the team gathered around an old ultrasound, analyzing the seemingly impossible. The image on the screen showed a baby much larger than any they had ever seen. The nervous murmurs grew in intensity. 30 kilos? Repeated the young medical assistant, Kwame, in disbelief as he adjusted his crooked glasses on his face. This can't be real. On the other side of the room, the experienced Dr. Kofi rubbed his temples hard, as if trying to erase the chaotic thoughts that invaded him. He, who had dedicated decades of his life to medicine in precarious conditions, had never encountered anything like this. "That's impossible," he exclaimed, his firm voice contrasting with his frightened expression. He took a deep breath and approached Amara, who was still holding the form with shaking hands. "Is the mother stable?" he asked, trying to gather information that would give him some control over the situation. Amara looked at him with teary eyes. "For now, yes, but birth will be a challenge beyond what we are prepared for." "What will we do, doctor?" The tension in the room felt tangible, almost as if it had its own weight. No one had answers, only questions that hung in the air like a collective burden. Meanwhile, in the waiting room, murmurs had already spread among the few patients and visitors present. Nzinga was a place where news traveled faster than the wind, and everyone wanted to know what was going on. "I heard it's a giant baby," an elderly woman whispered to her neighbor. "Maybe it's a divine sign," replied the other, with wide eyes and a mixture of fear and curiosity. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere became increasingly charged. The ultrasound left no doubt. The child really had gigantic proportions. "I've never seen anything like this in my entire career," said Kofi as he looked at the data again. He knew this wasn't just a medical challenge. It was something that surpassed his understanding. However, there was no time to hesitate. "Prepare the delivery room immediately," he ordered, his voice echoing throughout the room. As preparations were made, distant thunder reverberated, announcing the arrival of a storm. It was as if even the weather was aligning with the unique moment that was about to happen. However, something more disturbing was beginning to emerge. Among the team members themselves, whispers about local superstitions were beginning to circulate. "What if it's a curse?" Kwame ventured to say in a low tone, but audible enough to be heard by Amara, who cut him off with a stern look. "We have no room for superstitions here, Kwame. There's a life at risk, maybe two. Focus on work." But even Amara couldn't ignore the weight of the ancient stories that echoed in the village's memory. Nzinga was a land rich in myth and legend, and many believed that extraordinary events carried deep spiritual meanings. What if this baby was an omen, a sign of hard times, or a blessing in disguise? These questions remained unanswered, while time seemed to slow down, making every second even more harrowing. In the delivery room, the atmosphere was one of expectation and fear. The mother, Zuri, fought the pain with a strength that impressed even the most experienced. His labored breathing filled the space, while his hands gripped the side of the stretcher. She knew something unusual was happening, but her mind was focused on just one thing: bringing her daughter into the world. "Zuri, you are strong. Stronger than you know," Amara said, holding his hand in a gesture that was both technical and deeply human. Outside, Dr. Kofi was making final adjustments to the few pieces of equipment available. "If the storm cuts the power, we will be completely blind," he thought with a heavy heart. The hospital's generator, already unstable, threatened to fail at any moment, adding another layer of tension to the scenario. And then, as if fate wanted to increase the drama of the moment even more, the storm arrived. Heavy rain pounded against the hospital's tin roof, creating a deafening sound. Inside the delivery room, everyone was in position, waiting for the decisive moment. Kofi looked at Amara, and their eyes exchanged a silent understanding. This was bigger than either of them. When labor actually began, it was impossible to ignore the feeling that they were about to witness something that would change not just their lives, but perhaps the entire Nzinga community. An almost palpable tension hung in the air, while fate seemed to hold its breath along with everyone present. The birth was hanging in the balance, and no one knew whether that day would be remembered as a miracle or a tragedy. Adissa walked back and forth in front of the small mud and straw house where she lived. The sultry afternoon heat seemed even more intense as he stared off into the horizon, toward the hospital, as if his eyes could reach Zuri. With each passing minute, anxiety mixed with unshakable determination. In hands calloused from working on the land, he held firmly the Mwanzo amulet, a small wooden sculpture with rustic features, but details that told stories of past generations. Adissa believed that this object was not just a reminder of his ancestors, but a shield against forces that science could not explain. "My daughter will be a blessing to us all," he murmured, as if trying to convince himself. His voice, normally firm and deep, now sounded broken with concern he couldn't hide. He knew that rumors had already started to spread throughout the village. The giant baby was seen by many as a sign of something supernatural. Some whispered of a curse, others spoke of a divine omen. But Adissa had no doubts. For him, it didn't matter what others said. That child was a gift from heaven. He tightened his grip on the amulet, feeling the rough touch of the wood on his skin, as if he sought strength there. The sounds of the surrounding village were quieter than usual, as if the surroundings themselves shared the tension. In the distance, the noise of children playing had died down. Even the animals seemed strangely silent. Adissa took a deep breath, the hot air burning her throat, and sat down under the shade of a nearby acacia tree. There, he let his thoughts wander, remembering the days Zuri told him she was pregnant. It was a moment of joy amid the challenges of a simple life, but full of love. Now, however, he could not ignore the weight that this birth brought. As he passed his hand over his sweat-damp forehead, an old acquaintance approached. It was Jabari, the village elder, a figure respected for his wisdom and advice. He sat next to Adissa without saying anything for a few moments, just watching the horizon. Finally, he broke the silence. "Adissa, there is something special about this child. We all feel it, but special can mean many things. Are you prepared for what's to come?" Adissa looked up at Jabari, her eyes reflecting a mixture of certainty and doubt. "What do you mean, old friend? My daughter will be strong. She will be our hope. There is no room to fear what has not yet happened." Jabari sighed and placed a staff on the ground. "I hope you're right. But remember, the village is made up of people, and people can be as unpredictable as storms. Don't let the fear of others corrupt your faith." Adissa nodded, but Jabari's words echoed in her mind. He knew that the malicious whispers were already starting to gain strength. Some residents believed that the birth of such an unusual child could bring bad luck to the community. Others, more devout, said that the girl could be the incarnation of an ancestral spirit, coming to correct the mistakes of the past. Deep down, Adissa knew that she would have to protect her daughter not only from the physical difficulties that could arise, but also from opinions that could turn into accusations. He stood up, leaving the amulet hanging around his neck, and stared at the hospital. His heart was beating fast, but his mind was clear. No matter what happens, she'll be my daughter, and no one, not even the gods, can change that. As he walked back home, he came across a group of villagers gathered under the shade of a baobab tree. The low voices stopped the moment Adissa approached. It was evident that they were talking about the baby. One of the women, with curious eyes and a hesitant voice, asked, "Adissa, are you afraid? A baby that size might not be natural." He paused for a moment, taking in the faces in front of him. What is natural for us can be a miracle for others. My daughter will be strong, and that is enough for me. Without waiting for answers, he continued on his way, leaving the group even more intrigued. Night began to fall, bringing temporary relief from the oppressive heat. Stars appeared in the dark sky as Adissa lit a small fire in front of her house. He felt like every minute of waiting seemed like an eternity, but he knew Zuri needed him in thought, if not in presence. He began to hum a soft melody, a song his grandmother used to sing to calm the spirits and bring protection. His grades, although low, carried the strength of his faith and hope that everything would be okay. As the bonfire flame danced in the wind, Odissa watched the Mwanzo amulet shine in the firelight. In his mind, he repeated like a mantra, "She is my blessing, no matter what anyone says." In his heart, however, a question still haunted him. If the village did not accept his daughter, would he have the strength to fight against everyone? The thought made him press the amulet once more, as if that could give him the answer. The wait continued, but Odysseus' heart was determined. He would face any challenge to protect his family. And in the distance, the sound of the storm began to echo, as if announcing that the real battle was yet to come. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was one of almost suffocating tension. The sound of heavy rain hitting the tin roof competed with the sounds of old equipment as Zuri continued in labor. Their rapid, choppy breaths filled the room, mixing with the apprehensive whispers of the medical team. Each contraction was a battle that she faced with courage, but her body showed signs of exhaustion. Dr. Kofi, beside Amara, watched the monitors with growing concern. There was no denying it. The hospital was ill-equipped to deal with such an unusual situation. He knew they were running out of time. "If we don't do something now, we will both lose," Amara said, her voice thick with urgency. Her gaze met Kofi's, who looked away for a moment, unable to hide his frustration. He was a man used to improvising, but this was beyond any improvisation. "The question is not just what to do," he replied with a serious tone. "It's like doing it without the necessary resources." They both knew the generator was about to fail, and the storm raging outside only increased the likelihood of an imminent blackout. A power failure would be catastrophic at that critical moment. In the waiting room, Odissa felt each minute drag by like an eternity. The constant murmur of the villagers who had gathered at the hospital did not go unnoticed by him. Words like curse and sign echoed between them, each one heavier than the last. He tried to block the comments, but one sentence cut through like a blade. "This baby should not be born. Something like this is not natural." Odissa closed her eyes for a moment, holding the amulet in her shaking hands. He refused to believe that his daughter could be seen as anything other than a blessing. But deep down, I felt a growing anger at the irrational fear of others. Inside the delivery room, Zuri held Amara's hand tightly, her expression alternating between pain and determination. "I won't give up," Zuri whispered, her voice weak but full of conviction. Amara squeezed his hand back. "You are strong, Zuri. We are here with you." But as much as she wanted to comfort the patient, Amara couldn't shake the weight of the worries that haunted her. She knew they needed a solution, and quickly. Suddenly, the sound of thunder outside became even louder, and the light in the room flickered, announcing an imminent blackout. Kofi looked at the orderlies and gave quick orders. "Bring flashlights, charge portable batteries. We can't stop now." He turned to Amara. "We have to prepare for a cesarean section, but with a generator like this, we run the risk of not having enough energy for the equipment." The dilemma was clear. Attempting a natural birth might be too risky, but a cesarean section without adequate resources was also a dangerous gamble. Meanwhile, in the waiting room, Odissa stood up abruptly, unable to remain passive in the face of the situation. He walked to the door that led to the hallway and tried to cross, but was stopped by an assistant. "Please, sir, you can't come in." Odissa clenched her fists, her eyes burning with worry and indignation. "My wife is inside. My daughter is struggling to be born. I can't just sit here and listen to people say it shouldn't exist." The assistant hesitated but remained firm. "Trust the medical team. They're doing the best they can." In the delivery room, things reached a critical point. Zuri began to lose strength, and her vital signs showed signs of instability. Kofi looked at Amara, and for a moment, the weight of responsibility almost paralyzed him. But he knew that hesitating was not an option. "Prepare everything for the cesarean section," he ordered, his voice firmer than he actually felt. Amara nodded and began to coordinate the team, but the atmosphere was full of tension. An assistant rushed in with the news that the generator would no longer last much longer. Outside, the murmurs among the villagers increased. An older woman with a stern expression commented in a tone loud enough for everyone to hear, "This kind of birth only brings problems." Do you remember the story when a child like that was born in another village? The harvest was lost the following year. Others began to agree, and the climate of superstition spread like wildfire. Odessa, hearing that, turned to the crowd, her voice brimming with emotion. "My daughter is not a curse. She is my family, and family is protected, no matter what they say." His words silenced the murmurs for a moment, but the suspicious looks remained. Inside the hospital, the sound of a shrill alarm interrupted preparations. It was a warning that the generator was about to shut down. Kofi shouted instructions to speed up the process, while Amara tried to keep Zuri conscious. "Zuri, stay with me. Just a little longer." Zuri, with visible effort, opened her eyes and whispered, "Please save my daughter." The force of that request reverberated through everyone in the room, renewing their determination. But time seemed to be against them. Odessa, from where she was, felt something change inside her. He left the waiting room and walked outside the hospital. With a strong wind carried the smell of wet earth and the incessant sound of the storm. He knelt on the muddy ground, holding the amulet, and began to mutter a prayer, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. He didn't know if his words would be heard, but at that moment, it was all he could do. And deep down, a part of him believed that somehow Zuri and his daughter's fate was still in the hands of something greater. After hours of unbearable tension, something extraordinary happened at Nzinga Hospital. The rain continued to pound the roof, as if nature itself was aware of the magnitude of the moment. Inside the delivery room, a sharp scream from Zuri announced that the effort was coming to an end. A powerful and unexpected sound took over the environment, the baby's crying. But this was no ordinary cry. It was loud, strong, almost supernatural, reverberating off the hospital walls and silencing everyone present. For a brief moment, even the storm outside seemed to waver. All eyes turned to the newborn. The silence that followed was so absolute that even the most experienced professionals in the room seemed petrified. Dr. Kofi, still holding the surgical instruments with trembling hands, watched the child with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. When Amara held her for the first time, it was evident that this was no ordinary child. It was huge but incredibly perfect. His features were serene, as if he already carried a wisdom that no one could explain. Their eyes, large and intense, slowly opened, and the way they looked at everyone around them seemed almost conscious. It was as if she was studying each face, understanding more than any newborn could. "Call Odessa," Amara said, her voice still choked with emotion. She looked at Zuri, who, exhausted but with a slight smile, murmured something that made everyone's hearts race. She was born with the amulet in hand. Those words sounded like a prophecy. Nobody knew how this was possible. The object that Odessa carried so much was now in the newborn's fingers, as if she had claimed it herself. When Odessa entered the room, what he saw left him speechless. He had expected something unusual, but nothing could prepare him for the sight of his daughter. There she was, a gigantic, perfect girl, holding the small wooden talisman as if it had always been a part of her. His eyes met Odessa's, and he felt a chill run down his spine. Those eyes seemed to look straight into his soul. "Zuri, how?" he began but couldn't finish the sentence. The mother, with the little strength she had left, smiled and said, "She chose Odessa." She knew. He held Zuri's hand and then looked at the child again. The weight of responsibility hit him like a wave. This wasn't just the birth of a daughter. It was the beginning of something that he still didn't fully understand, but that he knew was bigger than himself. However, the strange events didn't stop there. When Amara tried to take the amulet out of the child's hands to examine it, something unexpected happened. The girl squeezed the small object so hard that the piece would almost gave way. Doctors and nurses looked at each other, astonished. "That's not possible," whispered Kwame, the assistant with wide eyes. No newborn has the strength to do something like that. Dr. Kofi approached, trying to maintain his composure. But even he was beginning to wonder if this was a purely biological event. Adissa, still standing next to Zuri, watched the scene in complete silence. His heart was filled with pride, but also with a growing uneasiness. He knew that the girl would be seen as a miracle by some, but he also feared the judgments of those who believed in curses. When Zuri reached out to him, it was as if it brought him back to reality. "Take care of her, Adissa. She is stronger than any of us can imagine, but she will still need you." Meanwhile, news began to spread throughout the hospital and quickly reached the village. The giant baby had been born, and with him, rumors of his unusual strength. In the corridor, some patients and villagers whispered among themselves, each trying to interpret the meaning of that birth. "I heard she was born holding something," said a woman in a low voice. "Maybe it's a sign. But from what?" Others shook their heads, still in disbelief. "No good omen comes with such force," commented an older man, while crossing his arms suspiciously. Inside the delivery room, the situation continued to surprise. When Amara finally managed to free the amulet from the child's hand, the girl let out a cry that made everyone around her instinctively retreat. It was a sound that seemed to carry a warning, an inexplicable force. But as quickly as it started, the crying stopped, and the girl looked around again with her calm expression. "Adissa," said Dr. Kofi, still trying to collect his thoughts, "your daughter is unique. I don't know how to explain what we're seeing, but I know it will be something everyone will remember." Adissa nodded slowly, absorbing those words. He knew Kofi was right. This was just the beginning of a story that would change their lives forever. But as he looked at his daughter again, he felt no fear. She felt pride, love, and the certainty that, no matter what happened, he would be by her side. As the amulet was placed on a nearby table, lightning lit up the sky, and the storm seemed to rage stronger. It was as if the world outside was also reacting to the arrival of that special child. Adissa held his daughter in his arms for the first time and noticed that she already had something he hadn't expected, a slight smile, as if she knew something that no one else knew. Deep down, he also felt like he was about to find out. The news spread through Nzinga village like wildfire. Within hours, the small hospital became a meeting place, where the curious, fearful, and skeptical gathered to witness what many already considered a supernatural event. The rain that fell intensely did not stop the crowd from growing, bringing with it a mixture of excited voices and whispers full of superstition. Some saw the girl's birth as a divine miracle, a gift from the gods that could bring prosperity to the village. Others, however, murmured about curses and impending disasters, citing ancient stories of dark times. In the midst of that commotion, a figure caught everyone's attention. Naya, the keeper of the stories, approached with slow but steady steps. His presence was unmistakable. He was dressed in a long cloth with tribal patterns and carried in his hands an ancient scroll, rolled up carefully. Naya was known for her wisdom and for keeping the ancient legends and secrets of the Nzinga people. Her gaze was penetrating, and even the most skeptical were silent when she arrived. As he opened the scroll, Naya's voice echoed above the noise of the crowd. Centuries ago, a prophecy was written. It spoke of the birth of a giant child, a child who would bring balance or destruction to the earth. Naya's words fell on the crowd like lightning. Some crossed their arms in disbelief, while others leaned closer, eager to hear the rest of the story. Her fate is not predetermined, Naya continued, her voice heavy with gravity. It will be decided by how you treat her. If you see it as a curse, it will bring misfortune. But if you welcome it as a blessing, it will be the force that will save everyone. Adissa, who had remained inside the hospital until then, heard the growing hubbub and went out to face the crowd. His eyes, once filled with uncertainty, now brimmed with determination. He held the Mwanzo amulet around his neck, which seemed to shine in the uneven light of the torches in the storm. He knew he needed to speak. He needed to protect his daughter. "She's my daughter," he began, his voice cutting through the sudden silence. "It is not a curse, nor an omen of disaster. She's the promise of a better future, I will not allow her to be seen as anything less than that. Naya's eyes met Odysseus, and the elderly woman smiled slightly, as if she recognized the strength he carried. But before he could respond, a voice from the crowd interrupted. "What if you're wrong?" asked an elderly man, his expression filled with fear. "What if she's the start of something we can't control?" This comment reignited the tension, and the murmurs returned with force. Odysseus, however, did not back down. He took a step forward, his gaze fixed on the man. "What we cannot control is the fear that divides us. My daughter is not the problem. The problem is the fear that makes us see miracles as threats." Naya raised her hand, asking for silence once again. Odysseus is right. Fear turns blessings into burdens. But remember, this child carries great power, and with great power comes great responsibility. It is up to you to decide how it will be guided. The old woman's words seemed to weigh on everyone present. It wasn't just a question of accepting or rejecting the baby. It was a choice that would shape the future of the village. Inside the hospital, Zuri, still exhausted, heard part of the commotion. Even though she was weak, she asked for her daughter to be brought to her. When he finally held the girl in his arms, he felt renewed strength. "Odysseus is out there for us," she said, her voice soft but full of conviction. "He believes, and I believe too. Our daughter is special, but she is ours, and no one but us will decide your fate." Meanwhile, outside, tension in the crowd continued to rise. A small group began to pressure Odysseus, demanding that he explain what he would do if the girl really caused problems. "What if the crops fail?" shouted a woman. "What if the drought returns?" said another man. Odysseus raised her hand, asking for silence. "What if it brings rain where there is drought? What if it helps us harvest more than we have ever harvested?" You can only imagine the worst because you are not willing to believe the best. Naya watched everything closely, while the mood in the crowd oscillated between fear and hope. She then approached Odysseus and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are strong, Odysseus. Your strength is what this village needs now. But remember, strength is not just in words, but in actions." He nodded, knowing the real challenge was yet to come. The crowd began to disperse, but the suspicious looks of some remained. Odysseus knew that many were still divided. The village's acceptance would not come easily, but he was willing to fight for it. When the crowd finally dissipated, Naya stayed behind with Odysseus. "Your journey is just beginning," she said in a low tone. "And hers too." He looked towards the hospital, where Zuri was holding his daughter. "I know, but as long as I breathe, she will have someone who believes in her." Naya smiled again, but this time with a gleam of approval in her eyes. "So it's off to a good start, Odysseus. May the force be with you." As the months passed, Amani grew impressively. What started as curiosity about his strength and size quickly turned into admiration. Little by little, the murmurs of fear that echoed through the village were replaced by words of hope. Not only was his body developing at an astonishing rate, but his intelligence was also extraordinary. Before she even turned a year old, she demonstrated an understanding that defied logic. His strength, previously seen as something frightening, began to be used for the good of the community. It was during the Great Drought that Amani's impact became impossible to ignore. Harvests failed, and food became scarce. Desperate residents looked at the arid fields without knowing what to do. Odysseus, determined to keep his family and his village together, organized a caravan to collect seeds from a neighboring region. When they arrived, transporting the bags, so heavy that they would require several days of work, seemed impossible. But Amani, even so young, surprised everyone. With strength that defied logic, she single-handedly carried dozens of bags, completing the job in just a few hours. This event marked a turning point in the way the village saw it. What was once a source of fear has become an inspiration. From that day on, Amani was not just the giant child. She was the force that drove Nzinga. Their presence united residents around a common goal: to rebuild and prosper. Odysseus and Zuri watched everything with a mix of pride and gratitude. The girl they had fought so hard to protect was now giving back, not just to them, but to everyone around them. Months later, a violent storm hit the village. The hospital, which was already precarious, was seriously damaged. The mud walls partially collapsed, and the tin roof was torn off by the wind. As adults gathered desperately to try to minimize the damage, Amani stood out again. Just a few years old, she helped lift beams and transport materials, acting as an indispensable force in the reconstruction. But it wasn't just his strength that was impressive. Amani showed a kindness that won over everyone around her. She smiled at the younger children and played with them, even though she was visibly different. Her serene gaze and her way of dealing with others made her a figure of peace and unity. Naya, who always watched her closely, saw something in her that few could understand. She is more than flesh and blood, Naya said to those who came seeking answers. The size of your body is small near the greatness of your soul. The phrase became a kind of mantra in the village, something that everyone repeated when they talked about Amani. Adissa, who always believed her daughter, was stronger every day. He knew they would still face challenges, but the union that Amani had brought to Nzingo was something he never imagined being possible. Zuri, in turn, recovered his strength as he watched the girl grow. She saw in Amani not just a daughter, but the embodiment of a promise fulfilled. The night after the hospital's reconstruction, the village met to celebrate. It was the first time in many years that the people of Nzingo allowed themselves to celebrate. Amani, sitting next to his parents, looked around with a smile that seemed to carry the light of the stars. Naya, next to her, put a hand over the girl's shoulder and said in a tone that seemed to echo over time, "You are a reminder that miracles are not ready. They are built with courage and love." Adissa nodded, looking at Zuri and then to his daughter. He knew Naya was right. Amani's view turned the village. Where before there was division, there was now unity. Where before there was fear, now there was hope. The physical and emotional strength of that girl transcended the limitations that the village had imposed on herself. And as the stars shone over Nzinga that night, everyone knew the future, though uncertain, was in good hands. Adissa squeezed the Mwanzo amulet in his neck, feeling his family warmth. He looked at Amani again, with a renewed certainty that no matter what ahead, they would face together. If you enjoyed this video, please help us grow by subscribing to this humble channel. And if you'd like to watch more videos like this, we prepared the next video especially for you. Click here to watch.